What do you want to be known for? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What does even a successful brand look like to you? How do you start your emails? What's the tone of voice that you're trying to get across? What's the ChatGPT prompts that you're putting in? Why do even larger brands do this? They're running to the shops. So at the same time, we need to do the same with our people that we're trying to get to buy from us. It really took, I would say, 8 months for me to see a result. It was beyond my wildest dreams. It completely supercharged my business. It's just being super strategic without being salesy. I was really lucky that I wasn't starting my business and starting my personal brand at the same time. But if I was, I would just...
How does that look like? What are the ingredients of a good brand?
When we're talking about building a brand, we're making sure that the visual and the verbal reflect strategic decisions. There's no pushback. This stuff worked. I personally saw the result. It starts with...
Vital, before we go deeper, can we have your definition of a personal brand?
Personal brand is a reputation built with intention. So I think that's the differentiation in terms of that. And then how you know that you have a successful personal brand is when your name is being mentioned in rooms that you're not in.
What are some of the real costs, let's say emotional, financial, of not controlling how you're perceived?
So I think it's just understanding that people connect with people. So, when a company page on LinkedIn is trying to talk about a product, no one's really engaging. It doesn't feel like there's really a person behind it. But when that's the difference between when Virgin says, we're having a competition, or when Richard Branson says we're having a competition. People trust Richard, but people don't necessarily trust the company. And I think company trust is just falling apart because people have hid behind the name for so long. So what they really want to see is a founder that's kind of able to be transparent about the journey. I'm a small business owner. This is what's happening on my day-to-day basis, or this is something that was really hard this week, or this is something that went really well this week. And when people are building with you, you're building your company and you're bringing people along with you, they feel more involved. And so they're more likely to buy and invest in the end product. If why do even larger brands do this? Let's say they're launching a lipstick and they think, we're a beauty brand. I'm going to think about who are our 50 most engaged Instagram followers. It doesn't have to be influencers, just followers. And they'll say, do you know what? Let's bring the 50 followers together. Let's get them to try out the lipstick. They can write about this on their Instagram. We'll do an event and everyone will try the lipstick and I want the feedback, and then they'll give us the feedback and then we'll tweak the product. These 50 people are so invested in that end result. The minute that goes, live, and the minute the end result is out and ready to be available to buy, they're running to the shops. We're the same, because a person was there. A person took us on the journey. So at the same time, we need to do the same with our people that we're trying to get to buy from us. We need to show them that we're real, that we're like them, that we go through the same experiences on a daily level. So if you don't really invest in the personal brand, it's just really missing out on a great selling tool.
There's one thing I think a lot of us, including myself, wrestle with. When you're scaling, there's a real tension between building a long-term personal brand or just doubling down on fast marketing wins like ads and funnels. Branding feels slower and riskier. Marketing feels faster and more measurable. So Avital, how do you think about that trade-off?
I think when you do these idea of short wins in marketing, it's just thinking short term. And if you want to be sustainable, you need to build long term. And that starts with building a brand. If you're really kind of building strategically, you'll build the brand before you'll build any kind of marketing. So I was working with a Facebook ad specialist for one of my clients. Or I was trying to onboard him before I'd, worked with him and making sure that he'd be available. And I was saying to him, what do you do when you're doing Facebook ads and maybe even the product works and it's a good product, but then you're taking them to a landing page and it is just a hot mess. And, the user experience hasn't been thought through and the pictures aren't great. And all the imagery they gave you was really good for the ads, but then you brought them back to the landing page and then what? And he just said it doesn't convert. And I think you think I'm going to put something out there and then people won't really look further, they'll just see the ad, they won't have time to think, and they'll go to the landing page. And even if it's a bad user experience, they're still going to buy. And the truth is, it's just not going to happen like that. So I think when you're building a business, making sure that that structure is really there means that your ads will be so much more successful. When the landing page is great and the product really works and the branding really speaks the same language as the ads, the ability to sell and make the ad successful is just so much higher.
So how does that look like? What are the ingredients of a good brand?
So I think that it starts with strategy. So, sitting down on a personal branding level and it's saying, what do you want to be known for? Where do you want to be in 5 years? You've just worked with a team. What is it that you did that was so great? Why were they calling you? What could they not do without you in the room? How do you want to be remembered? So I think that the strategic piece of understanding, what does even a successful brand look like to you? Like, are you trying to get more speaking engagements? Are you trying to get, onto more boards? Are you trying to make sure that when you release your book, more people buy it? Is it newsletter signups? Is it all of the above? And I think working out, how they define success and you define success and making sure that it's on the same page is really important. So I think it starts with defining success. And then it starts out with building this idea of like the strategic sessions of what does the business really look like that I want to build? Who am I trying to target? Who am I not trying to target? How do I want to speak? How do I not want to speak? Who do I want to be like? Who do I not want to be like? So I think it's a lot of like honest therapy or making sure like that thing and that personal brand that you're building is true to yourself. And then I think the second component, once this strategic session is finished, which normally takes about 10 to 12 hours, is moving on to this like verbal identity. And anyone that's writing your content needs this, so it's understanding what are the principles that you want to put across into your content. You want to come across punchy. What does it mean on a practical level? How do you start your emails? What's the tone of voice that you're trying to get across? What's the ChatGPT prompts that you're putting in? How do they look? What is a mock-up LinkedIn post? All of these kind of things. And making sure that when anyone kind of handles your content, they have the right principles. Otherwise, you sit there and you're repeating the same things over and over again. And essentially, only you can write the content because only you know how you sound. So getting those things out onto paper is really important. And then the final component is like, okay, so we've done the strategy. We know where you want to go. We know what you're trying to do. And we know how you speak on a verbal level. But how does it look? So we take everything and we say, okay, fine. So now it gets a visual identity and it gets a logo and it gets a palette and it gets an icon and it gets all these things that bring the brand to life. So when we're talking about building a brand, we're making sure that the visual and the verbal reflect strategic decisions.
If you're ready to take your business to the next level, don't miss out on my free burnout-free business guide. It's a simple 7-day plan to help you reset your relationship with your business, improve your mindset, and achieve more while staying balanced. You can download it right now by using the link in the description. Is there one thing that we should know about personal branding that nobody talks about?
I think so many people think I'm just going to, try it. I'm going to go on LinkedIn. I'm going to go on Instagram, but I'm not going to really think about the strategy first. And without the strategy, you're kind of just shooting in the dark and you'll see growth. And over time, you'll begin to be able to see what works. But if you went through it in advance and you thought, what do I really want to be known for? What are the content pillars that I want to focus on, through social media? What do I want to, avoid speaking about? What are my no's? What are my yeses? And you go through this process. The kind of like growth trajectory is so much quicker because you've gone through that at the beginning and you haven't spent, a few years working out what's great and what's not. And I think the other thing is, even when something does do really well, so, you have a viral post, let's say, the question is that a subject that you actually want to be continuously talking about? So even if you gain a ton of followers for your viral post, if the rest of the content that you normally post isn't really interesting to them, then you haven't really gained the right followers. So I think it's understanding that like you're really just trying to consistently attract the right people at the right time. And that means that if you want to do it right, you need to build a strategy first. It's really hard as a founder, like to do all the things that running a business really needs, right? And so when you have this identity and you can outsource your newsletter because someone understands your voice, and you can outsource your LinkedIn posts, or you can say, listen, I want to write a book, and you can give it to someone and you can voice note your ideas and they just get it because they have this guide in front of them. It saves you so much time. So again, it feels like a lot of work. It feels like that big investment at the beginning. And also everything rests on visuals. So, making sure that your videos open in the same way, making sure that you have like a strong banner that's consistent with your website coloring. All of these things matter and build trust. And when you neglect them, it means that I'm coming to your LinkedIn page. You've done something great. You've got me there. And it's not converting because now I look at your website and either there is no website or the website's, 10 years old because you just didn't think it mattered and that you could rest on it. Like, people want to trust the person. And so going through this process of building a personal brand on a strategic level just makes it so much easier in the long run. So that's what I think people don't recognize. They think that I can go straight to marketing and it's going to be fine. maybe it will for some, but for most, they'll realize I'm just giving this over and over again. I'm having to explain my design feelings over and again to the designer. I'm having to explain the way I speak. I'm done. I don't want to feel this way anymore. I want to do it once and I want it to be relevant for the next few years.
Bring me straight to the next question. Another doubt people often wrestle with is, what if I'm just not special enough to have a personal brand? How do you help someone see that their story still matters?
Right. So I think it's understanding that everyone has a story and it's how you sell it. So often I speak to people that are doing their first internship and they're very nervous when they're choosing their first internship. Should it be what I really want to do at college? Should it be, something that I know I want to go into? Or should I just do something different just because I can? And they're very worried about that narrative. And I say to them, all you need to do is make sure that you learn something from this internship, and that when you're going on to the next role and you're looking for the next internship, that you're able to sell your experience. So you need to be able to kind of focus on one thing. And being able to say, narrate the story and to pick up one thing that was really interesting about the experience. No one needs 10 points. And I think it's the same with your story. When you sit with someone and you tell them your story, they extract the information, but we often can't do it by ourselves. So hiring someone, to work with you on what's interesting about your story and what makes you unique, I think is like a really useful thing to do, be it, for a few hours, and they can extract the information that you think is really mundane and actually is really interesting to everyone else. I think I also feel that, like, on a personal level, always surprised, like, I recently arranged an event and I spoke at the event about personal branding. And when the event began, the room was like divided in two and the sound system hadn't been disconnected from the other room. So I was talking and then really I was speaking without a microphone, and all you could hear from like the overground, whatever sound system, was this person from the other room speaking. And I just wrote like, it was kind of uncomfortable, but it really began the session with a bang or something like that. Or, really, I don't know. And people like took it completely differently. People were like, oh, it's just because you're such a, great speaker that you knew what to do. This is amazing to see that like anyone can work with anything and not be uncomfortable. Because I said in the post that I basically sat down and I just started speaking to people and they just thought it was so brilliant. And I was like, I didn't think anything of it. And I think it's just like not really believing that you don't know what people will connect to. And so I think like when you overthink and you try and analyze, oh, what's working? Why aren't people interested in this too much? It kind of makes you lose that human aspect and ability to just take a risk and think, okay, worst comes to worst, it's not going to do great and I'll delete the post. And what?
So keep an open mind about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's easy to believe that building a personal brand will just create more work, more content, more pressure. So how do you show founders that done right, branding actually simplifies their lives, like you said before, rather than complicates it?
So I think I just share with them my inbox on LinkedIn and I show them the leads that happen and the opportunities that I'm put forward for. And I think it's really as simple as that. It's, I did this podcast and this person heard it and then they invited me to speak at their event and they paid me. Or, this opportunity opened this door and I got this lead and it was worth $20,000. I think that what I do in all my workshops, is actually show this is what moved the needle, because it's not about writing, 3 times a week and maintaining consistency if you don't have something of value to say. It's sitting there and saying, who am I trying to attract? And we say, okay, this is the target audience of who I'm trying to attract. Okay. How can they read the post and connect? So A, there's a topic, but B, there's getting super specific. So if I'm looking, for my next client for the next quarter, what do? I write about a past client. So I say, Rob came to me at age 50, looking to retire in 10 years. And when we were looking to define success, he said that he wanted to retire with the most amount of money he's ever had in 10 years' time. And I said, let's get there. Like that person who is now 50 years old and thinking, I want to make the most amount of money in the next 10 years possible. I'm going to do this through my personal brand and I want more speaking opportunities. I want to sit on boards. I want to do amazing things, and I'm now telling you that that's the kind of client I work with. Oh, she's speaking to someone like me. So I think what you have to do is work backwards, is write the post with the ideal client in mind. Or, just spoke at that conference. Why are you doing that? Because you want someone else to see that they should invite you to speak at their conference. So it's just being super strategic without being salesy. So if terms of like someone giving me pushback, like there's no pushback. This stuff works. Look at the opportunities that have come. Look at the deals I've signed. I'm happy to give all the details when I have those sort of meetings and give those presentations. Obviously not who it was with, but a typical profile and for how much. And then there's no question. It's worth it. It's worth the investment because it works, but it takes time. If I started doing this in October 2023, let's say, it really took, I would say, 8 months for me to see a result.
That's not such a long time for building a brand, to be honest.
It's not such a long time. And I think that as understanding, that was my timeline, and I've seen different timeline with clients, but it works when it's done right. Yeah. And I think that the thing that I could also is really important is to be able to pinpoint what moved the needle. So I go back from when I started my LinkedIn profile, when I'm doing these workshops or working with, founders that need convincing. And I explain to them I wrote this post, this is what happened. Then I did this and this is what happened. And when you actually take them through the journey and they're able to see on a strategic level what everything led to, they feel so invested and they're like, of course I want to do this. I'm going to see the results, but I'm going to put in the effort.
Some people that are going to be listening to this are still on the fence about that. And we're not trying to convince them, but we do want to open their minds, like we said, and shed some light about personal brand and trying to sometimes deal with the emotional, like I said, the hidden fears, exposing myself in a way that I don't want people to know that about me. I'm going to have to be sharing things I don't want to share. A lot of people fear that. Being overly exposed, overly sharing, and they're not sure they're ready to deal with that. So do you have anything to say to them?
Yeah, I think that, you only have to be as vulnerable as you want to be. No one's going to stand there with like a gun to your head and say, you have to share this. And I think things take a while until you feel comfortable, and you might not feel comfortable. Often people don't want to share their kids, and maybe it would make a great post, but that's their boundary. Or in the very religious world, is it even as a profile picture, a lot of women aren't comfortable sharing their picture. So they rest on a logo or, different things. Actually, someone asked me today, they were an artist, and they said, should my profile picture be a picture of my work or my logo? And I thought it was like an interesting question because, these things make it hard. But I think that it's the understanding that no one's going to make you do something you don't want to do. And, working through those stories, even if you're just speaking for a few hours and with someone and someone's able to tell you, this is really interesting and people would really value from hearing that. And I think a lot of women in general also think, we're really boring. This wasn't interesting. I think I hear a lot of women come to me kind of saying that more than I hear it from men. And I think that it's just understanding that, like, give it a try. The worst that can happen is that you give it a few months and you say, do you know what? This isn't for me. But if you don't try, like, the answer will always, always be no.
We give the full framework, but for founders who are busy and maybe even a bit burned out, what's the super simple branding habit they could build into their routine starting today?
Send voice notes to yourself. Every time, something happens that might be interesting, record it. You're not going to write it down, but just making sure that you have this conversation with yourself, even if you're not ready now. It's really hard to remember all the things that happen. And so when you are really ready to start the journey, you're going to be able to tell the person that you're working with all of those stories, or you're going to be able to send the content writer that you're trying to work with, everything that happened. And they're going to be able to extract the interesting points. So I think if you're thinking about starting a personal brand, just start recording the interesting moments of your day.
And if you connected with what Avital shared today, and deep down, it's time to become a voice, not just another noise, definitely check out the work. We'll link everything below: her site, her resources, and ways you can go even deeper. Avital, is there anything specific you'd love to invite the listeners to check out for, or a first step you recommend they take if they want to move from noise to impact?
Yeah, I think just like start following me on LinkedIn, go through my posts. When I'm trying to get a new client, I really try and look for as much content about them as possible. So it's the same when I'm trying to connect with someone and I want to really understand the way they think about things. I go back through the years. If they're like write a lot on LinkedIn, I go and look through all the content and really get familiar with kind of who they are, what they're passionate about, and how things have evolved.
Now you got the ingredients of a great brand, but how do you turn that into real growth on a platform like LinkedIn without becoming just another voice in the noise? In the next chapter, we'll break down the simple 3-pillar method that helped Avital turn her brand into one of the most powerful voices on LinkedIn. And it's probably a lot easier than you think. In fact, I was surprised by how simple and straightforward this method is.